The call came at 12:24 a.m., jolting me awake in the passenger seat of my old sedan. My neck ached, my fingers were numb from the cold, and the name on the screen, David, made my stomach clench. I answered on the third ring. For a long moment, all I heard was his ragged breathing, nothing like the calm, assured voice I'd lived with for 2 decades. Then, a whisper, "Eleanor, why are you all over the news?" I frowned, glancing around the dimly lit gas station parking lot. Across the asphalt, a 24-hour convenience store had a small television mounted above the coffee counter. The volume was low, but every customer inside was staring at the screen. A woman in a bright yellow rain jacket was pulling a child from the shattered window of a minivan sinking into icy water. Even before the camera zoomed in on her face, I knew it was me. 6 hours earlier, my husband had asked me not to come home for Christmas. It wasn't the moment our marriage shattered. It was simply the moment I finally realized it already had. 3 days prior, Christmas still felt ordinary. Our artificial tree, the same one we'd used for 15 years, stood proudly in the living room. Every December, I'd meticulously fluffed each branch by hand, while David, 49, would chuckle, saying no one would notice the difference. My reply was always the same: "I'll know." For most of our 22 years together, those small, shared moments had been enough. I was 45. We could finish each other's grocery lists, but not always each other's sentences anymore. People often assume marriages collapse due to one catastrophic event. Most don't. Most fade quietly, like a forgotten anniversary, a canceled dinner, a conversation where someone stops asking how your day was. By the time either person truly notices, loneliness has already settled in. 7 years ago, I'd left my job as a graphic designer to care for my mother after her stroke. We both believed it would be temporary. 1 year became 2, then 5. Returning to work became something we talked about, not something we planned. When Mom passed away 18 months ago, I suddenly had time again. David, however, had something else: a promotion to regional sales manager. Longer hours, business dinners, weekend conferences. His world expanded while mine grew strangely quiet. I tried not to resent it. I was proud of him. I only wished he still looked at me the way he had before the promotion. 3 days before Christmas, he called while I was wrapping gifts in the dining room. "Hey," I answered, smiling. His voice sounded distracted. "Are you home? Where else would I be? I need to tell you something." Those words are rarely followed by anything good. I put the scissors down. "What happened?" "My boss, Mr. Henderson. Remember I mentioned he might be in town?" "I remember. Well, he and his wife, Clara, are coming for Christmas Eve dinner." I smiled. "That's wonderful. I'll make the beef Wellington instead of the turkey." Silence. Not long. Just long enough. "I was actually thinking," he began. "Whenever someone starts a sentence that way, they're usually hoping you'll finish it for them." I didn't. "I was thinking it might be better if you weren't here." I honestly thought I'd misheard him. "What?" "They're important clients, Eleanor. Mr. Henderson wants a quiet evening. I'm your wife." "I know." Another pause. "I just don't want anything to feel awkward." The word hung in the air. Awkward. After 22 years, I had somehow become awkward. I stared at the half-wrapped box on the table. Inside was the vintage Leica camera lens he'd mentioned months ago while browsing an antique shop. He'd forgotten the conversation. I hadn't. "I don't understand," I said softly. "It's only one night." One night. Funny how life-changing decisions are often packaged as temporary inconveniences. "I've already planned Christmas dinner." "I appreciate that." He sounded sincere. That almost made it worse. "There are plenty of nice hotels nearby." Hotels? He wasn't asking me to visit my sister. He wasn't suggesting I spend the evening with friends. He was asking me to leave my own home. "I'll pay for everything," he added quickly, as though money could make the sentence kinder. I walked into the living room. Our stockings were already hanging over the fireplace. His, mine. Neither looked different from any other year, yet suddenly neither felt like it belonged to me. "Eleanor, are you there?" "I'm here. I don't want this to become a fight." Neither did I, mostly because I wasn't sure there was anything left to fight for. "When should I leave?" I asked. He let out a breath I hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Maybe tomorrow afternoon." "Tomorrow? Not next week. Tomorrow." I closed my eyes. "Okay. You understand?" "No. But understanding and accepting aren't the same thing. I'll figure something out. He thanked me. Actually thanked me. Then he hung up. I stood in the middle of the living room listening to the silence. The furnace kicked on. Outside, snow drifted across the front yard. Inside, the Christmas lights blinked exactly as they had 10 minutes earlier. Nothing had changed, except somehow everything had. The next morning, I packed one small suitcase. Not because I owned little, but because I couldn't decide what still felt like mine. Before zipping it closed, I reached into the closet and pulled out the yellow wool scarf David had given me on our 10th anniversary. For a second, I almost left it behind. Then I wrapped it around my neck. Whatever happened next, I refused to leave every good memory in that house. I picked up my suitcase, looked around one last time, and quietly locked the front door behind me. I had no idea that by the end of Christmas Eve, the entire country would know my face. The motel sat behind a gas station off Interstate 75. The kind of place people use when they are passing through, not when their own house is 20 minutes away. The sign outside flickered between vacancy and vacancy Y. A plastic Santa stood near the office door, leaning slightly to one side, like even he was tired of pretending. I parked beside a blue pickup dusted with road salt, and sat there for a moment with both hands still on the steering wheel. I had never spent Christmas Eve in a motel before. That sounds like a small thing until it happens. Inside, the room smelled faintly of bleach, old carpet, and the lemon cleaner people use when they're trying to cover up something sad. There was one bed, one chair, one lamp with a crooked shade, and a television mounted to the wall. The heater under the window rattled every time it kicked on. I set my suitcase on the luggage rack and stood in the middle of the room, unsure what to do with myself. At home, there would have been potatoes to peel, candles to arrange, napkins to fold. I would have checked the beef Wellington twice too often and asked David whether he wanted the good wine opened before dinner or after. Here, there was nothing to prepare, nothing expected of me, nobody waiting. I took off my coat, then put it back on because the room hadn't warmed up yet. I laughed once, quietly, not because anything was funny. Sometimes your body reaches for laughter when crying would take too much energy. Around noon, David texted, "Hope you're settled. Thank you for understanding." I stared at the message longer than necessary. There were so many things I could have typed. I could have asked whether Mr. Henderson complimented the decorations, or if Clara asked where David's wife was. But I didn't. I just put the phone down. The afternoon crawled by. I tried reading, but the words blurred. I tried watching television, but the cheerful Christmas specials felt like a cruel joke. Around 5 p.m., a local news report flickered on. A winter storm warning. Heavy snow and freezing rain expected overnight. I barely registered it. The world outside felt distant, unreal. As darkness fell, the snow began. Soft at first, then thicker, faster. The wind picked up, rattling the window pane. I pulled my yellow scarf tighter around my neck. The silence in the room was deafening. I thought about David, about Mr. Henderson, about the perfect Christmas Eve dinner happening without me. A sharp pang of loneliness hit me, so intense it almost took my breath away. Around 8 p.m., a loud bang echoed from the highway. Then another, followed by the screech of tires. My heart pounded. I walked to the window and peered out. Through the swirling snow, I could make out flashing lights in the distance. A few minutes later, the distinct wail of sirens grew closer. Something had happened. Curiosity, or perhaps just the desperate need to feel something other than sorrow, pulled me outside. The air was frigid, the snow already several inches deep. I walked toward the edge of the parking lot, where a small crowd had gathered, staring toward the highway. A minivan had skidded off the icy road and plunged into the partially frozen river that ran parallel to the interstate. The front half was already submerged, the rear window shattered. Panic seized me. I heard shouts, cries for help. A woman was screaming, my baby is inside." Without thinking, I started running. People yelled at me to stop, to wait for emergency services, but all I could see was the minivan, slowly sinking, and the frantic mother pointing toward the back seat. The water was shockingly cold, a punch to the gut. It reached my knees, then my waist, then my chest. I pushed through the slush and broken ice, the current pulling at my legs. The minivan was listing heavily, water pouring into the open rear window. I could hear a child crying inside, Reaching the vehicle, I saw a small boy, no older than 5, trapped by his seatbelt, his face streaked with tears. His mother was trying desperately to reach him, her hands raw from the jagged glass. "I can't get him," she sobbed. "The seatbelt is stuck." My own hands were numb, but adrenaline surged through me. I plunged my arm into the icy water, fumbling for the seatbelt buckle. It was jammed. I pulled harder, gritting my teeth against the cold and the sharp edges of the broken window. The minivan groaned, sinking another few inches. Time was running out. "Hold on, little one," I yelled, my voice hoarse. I remembered a trick from a first aid course years ago. If the buckle jams, sometimes pulling the strap completely taut can release the tension. I braced myself against the side of the van, pulled the strap with all my strength, and with a sudden click, the buckle released. The boy tumbled forward into my arms. "There's a girl too," the mother cried, pointing to the back. A tiny hand was visible, barely above the rising water. I passed the boy to his mother, who was now being helped by a bystander on the riverbank. Then, without a second thought, I dove back into the vehicle. The water was up to my chin now. I could barely see. I felt for the little girl, her small body stiff with cold and fear. Her seatbelt was also jammed. My fingers were losing all sensation. I could feel the minivan shifting, tilting further. I took a deep breath, pushing down into the frigid water, searching for the buckle. My lungs burned. I found it, a cold, metallic object, and with a desperate surge of strength, I yanked. It clicked. I pulled the little girl free, her small body limp in my arms. As I surfaced, gasping for air, the minivan gave a final lurch. I scrambled toward the broken rear window, pushing the girl ahead of me. Just as we fell onto the snowy riverbank, the minivan plunged forward another 2 feet. Within seconds, the front half disappeared beneath the dark water. Silence, except for the wind. Then, distant sirens. The first deputy sheriff arrived less than 4 minutes later. Fire engines followed. Paramedics, state troopers. The scene exploded into organized chaos. Someone wrapped a blanket around the little boy. Another EMT examined the driver's head wound. The little girl refused to let go of her mother's hand. I stood off to one side, soaked to the skin, shivering so violently my teeth hurt. An EMT approached me. "Ma'am, you're bleeding." I looked down. A long cut stretched across the back of my left hand. I hadn't even noticed. "I'm okay. Let's make sure." He guided me toward the ambulance. As he cleaned the cut, another paramedic checked my blood pressure. "You went into that vehicle." I nodded. "You could have died. So could they." He smiled faintly. "Fair point." Across the road, I noticed a television camera. A local news crew. Someone must have heard the emergency call over the scanner. The reporter, Sarah Chen with Channel 8, stood near the patrol cars, speaking into a microphone while snow swirled around her. A cameraman wandered through the safe perimeter, collecting footage. I paid almost no attention. Reporters come and go. Lives matter more. A firefighter carrying a thermal blanket walked over. "The family wants to thank you." I shook my head. "They don't have to." They insisted. The father approached slowly, his forehead bandaged. He looked at me for several seconds before speaking. "I don't know your name." "Eleanor." He swallowed. "Eleanor, you saved my family." I wasn't sure how to answer, so I simply said, "I'm glad you're all here." His daughter suddenly ran across the snow and hugged me around the waist. Her winter coat was still damp. "So are we." That nearly broke me. Not because of the words, but because children rarely thank people the way adults do. Adults worry about saying the right thing. Children simply tell the truth. Sarah Chen noticed us and walked over cautiously. "I'm Sarah Chen with Channel 8. Would you mind answering one question?" I almost said no. Instead, I nodded once. She held out the microphone. "What made you run toward the vehicle when everyone else was still stopping?" I looked back toward the river. The minivan had almost completely disappeared beneath the dark water. "I didn't really think," I admitted. "There were children inside. There wasn't any other choice. So you don't consider yourself a hero?" I smiled, tired more than anything else. "I think most people would have done exactly the same thing." She thanked me. The interview lasted less than 30 seconds. I climbed into my car shortly afterward. The heater took forever to warm up. My clothes were soaked, my hands still shook against the steering wheel. By the time I pulled back onto the highway, it was a little after midnight. I had no idea the brief interview was already being replayed on every local television station, and I certainly had no idea that somewhere across town, my husband had just looked up from Christmas dessert and seen my face on the screen. The drive back to the motel should have taken 15 minutes. Instead, it took almost 30. The snow kept coming, thick enough that the highway disappeared beneath a blanket of white. My windshield wipers worked constantly, pushing away flakes only to have another wave replace them seconds later. The cut on my hand had stopped bleeding, but it stung every time I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Mostly, I felt tired. Not dramatic movie scene tired, just the quiet exhaustion that comes after your body spends 20 minutes running on adrenaline and suddenly remembers it's 45 years old. The motel parking lot was almost empty when I pulled in. I shut off the engine and sat there for a minute. Everything had become strangely quiet again. The rescue already felt unreal, as though it had happened to someone else. I grabbed my purse, climbed out of the car, and limped toward my room. Halfway across the parking lot, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I ignored it. Then another. Then another. By the time I unlocked the motel room door, there were 6 missed calls and 3 text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. I frowned. Wrong number, maybe? I tossed the phone onto the bed and headed for the bathroom. My clothes were still damp despite the heater in the car. The hot shower felt almost painful at first. As warmth returned to my hands, I finally allowed myself to think about what had happened. The little girl's face, the freezing water, the sound of breaking glass, the father thanking me. Then another thought pushed its way in. David. For a second, I wondered how Christmas dinner had gone. Had Mr. Henderson enjoyed the beef Wellington? Had Clara complimented the decorations? Had anyone asked where David's wife was? I pushed the thought away. It didn't matter anymore. After drying off, I changed into sweatpants and one of David's old college t-shirts I'd packed without thinking. Old habits. Some disappear slowly. I had just lowered myself onto the edge of the bed when my phone exploded with notifications. Buzz, 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 buzz. The screen lit up continuously. Voicemail, text messages, missed calls. Then one name appeared. David. I stared at it. He hadn't called once since asking me to leave. Now he was calling after midnight. I answered. Hello? Silence. Then his breathing. Fast. Eleanor? Are you there? I'm here. Another pause. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight, strained. Why didn't you tell me? Tell you what? About the accident. About the rescue. It's all over the news. I closed my eyes. What did you expect me to do, David? Call you in the middle of your important Christmas dinner and interrupt your perfect evening with Mr. Henderson? My voice was colder than the river water. I was a few miles away, in a motel room, because you asked me to leave my own home. He was silent again. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the realization hitting him. Eleanor, I saw you. On TV. You were so brave. Brave? I scoffed. Is that what you call it when your wife is risking her life while you're entertaining clients? No, I mean, I was worried. Worried? I laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. You were worried? Or were you worried about how it looked? Your wife, on the news, pulling children from a freezing river, while you're hosting a fancy dinner. That's not fair, he said, his voice dropping. I messed up, Eleanor. I know I did. I made a terrible mistake. His voice cracked. I've been watching the news reports. They're calling you a hero, and I just kept thinking that's my wife, and I felt like a fool. A fool? Yes, a fool for letting you go. A fool for prioritizing my job over you. For making you feel awkward. The very word he had used to dismiss me, now sounded like a confession. I called Mr. Henderson. I told him I had a family emergency. I told him I had to leave. You did what? I left. I'm in the car now. I'm coming to you. David, don't. It's late. The roads are terrible. I don't care. I need to see you. I need to tell you. I'm so sorry. I hung up. My heart was pounding, but not from fear or cold anymore. It was a strange mix of anger, confusion, and something else. A flicker of hope, perhaps. I walked back to the window. The snow was still falling, but less intensely now. In the distance, I saw headlights approaching. He arrived 15 minutes later, covered in snow, his face pale and drawn. He didn't even knock. He just opened the door, his eyes scanning the room until they met mine. "Eleanor," he whispered, as if seeing me for the first time. "What do you want, David?" "I want to apologize. Properly. I want to tell you how much I regret what I did. I want to tell you that I was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong." He took a step closer. I was so caught up in trying to impress Mr. Henderson, in trying to climb the ladder, that I completely lost sight of what truly matters. "You matter, Eleanor. Our marriage matters." I looked at him, searching his eyes for any trace of the man who had dismissed me as an inconvenience. There was only raw regret. "It's not that simple, David. You didn't just make a mistake. You made me feel like I was disposable." "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I can't change what I did. I know. I've already spoken with Mr. Henderson." I waited. I turned down the promotion they offered after New Year's. That surprised me. Why? Because I finally understood something. He smiled sadly. I kept chasing a career that would never sit beside me when I was 80. Silence followed. The kind that isn't uncomfortable, just thoughtful. I also sold the lake property I'd been saving for. "You loved that place." "I thought I did." He shrugged gently. "It turns out I mostly loved the idea of proving I'd made it." I studied his face. For the first time in years, he wasn't trying to impress anyone, not even me, especially not me. "I've been seeing a counselor," another surprise. "Alone?" "So far." He nodded once. I needed someone to explain why success started feeling more important than kindness. I couldn't help smiling a little. "And?" He said something I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. David looked toward the families walking through the community center. He said ambition becomes dangerous the moment it asks you to sacrifice the people who gave you the strength to pursue it. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I asked the question I'd been carrying since Christmas. "Why didn't you simply tell Mr. Henderson no?" David closed his eyes briefly. "Because I was afraid." "Of what?" "That he'd think I wasn't committed enough." He laughed once. A week later, he told me he would have respected me more if I'd insisted my wife stayed. Life has a strange sense of irony. The thing we fear losing often slips away because of the choices we make trying to protect it. David reached into his coat pocket. "I brought something. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't an expensive gift. It was my Christmas stocking, the one that had hung beside his every December. I don't expect you to come home today." I accepted it. The knitted fabric still smelled faintly of cedar from the storage box in our attic. "I don't even know if there will be a home for us again." "I understand. I mean, really understand." "I know." He smiled. "You've always been honest. I have learned honesty is kinder than false hope." He nodded. "I'll wait as long as it takes. You shouldn't wait forever." "I'm not waiting because I have to." He looked directly at me. "I'm waiting because I finally remember who I'm waiting for." The following months were quieter than either of us expected. We didn't move back together, not immediately. Instead, we started over in smaller ways. Coffee on Saturday mornings, walks through the park, long conversations without phones on the table. Sometimes we talked about our marriage. Sometimes we talked about birds at the feeder outside my sister's kitchen window. Healing, I discovered, rarely announces itself. It arrives disguised as ordinary moments. One afternoon in early spring, David helped repaint the community center. No reporters came, no cameras, no applause. When everyone else stopped for lunch, I found him quietly repairing a broken bookshelf in the children's reading room. "You missed your break," I said. He smiled without looking up. "I know. You don't have to prove anything." He finally looked at me. "I'm not." He tightened one last screw and stood. "I'm just trying to become someone I'd be proud to meet." That sentence stayed with me, not because it erased the past, nothing could, but because real change rarely begins with promises. It begins with different habits repeated over time. By the following Christmas, we weren't the same couple we'd once been. We were older, more careful with each other's hearts. The Christmas tree stood once again in our living room. The same artificial tree, the same handmade ornaments, the same stockings, only this year, before hanging mine, David paused. "I'm glad you're home," he said. I looked around the room. Home. I finally understood that home isn't the place where your name is on the deed. It's the place where your presence is never treated like an inconvenience. Sometimes life gives us a second chance, not because we deserve one, but because we're finally willing to become the people we should have been all along. This story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.